There we go. Wow. Okay, so as my computer's voice just told me, we are recording. I'm Jim Porter, and this is John Pratt, and I'm a mental health counselor in the Gainesville, Florida area, but that really has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. This is my show or podcast that I created a few weeks ago called Change Jim Porter's Mind. The idea is that I hopefully can find a lot of people to disagree with at least once a week. That I just sit there and try to figure out everything about their point of view on the particular subject. And so, John, can you say anything about yourself?
I'm retired from business. A lot of people wouldn't know that my background was investigation. When I was younger, I took college courses in constitutional law, criminal codes, and such. But for the last 20 years, I've owned my own business and I'm just retired.
Okay, yeah, that's fascinating. I will say that I probably know a little bit about the business. And you are now retired, or you're going to be retiring? Is that what
I am retired for the most part. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll just go ahead and start with my position. It has to do with the January 6th event, I'm going to call it. And at the Capitol, by the way, there were probably events and other places. I guess because you mentioned firearms in our little conversation, I'm going to start with that. I'm definitely a person who is, if we're going to talk about right and left, I'm very left leaning or liberal leaning on the firearms issue. I'm very much into gun control. That's not what we're talking about today, but you mentioned that as an important. I'm very much into gun control, ownership control, and use of firearms control. That came up because I had responded to a post about January 6th that I think you created on Facebook. And I had said that I do believe that the January 6th event at the Capitol was an attempted coup, is one way to say it, like an attempted paramilitary coup, because it was not the United States military that had any involvement in it, or whatever. Because some people designate that as a different thing. And then what else about it? You had mentioned that it was not to the level of like Pearl Harbor and some of those other things, which I think actually is easy to agree with. But I emphasize that I think it was just as or more significant than those, because we survived those as a country. And in my opinion, this was an attempted coup at the executive level of government to keep a president in place in that office who did not win. And that there were two parts of it. And one of them still, I think, active. And that is, the one part was just a bunch of people kind of doing basic rioting stuff. Some of them more organized than others, like the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers or whatever, with a real attempt to prevent the certification of the election results. And let's see, I want to keep my part short, but that's why I went and got the coffee, because I was having trouble putting my part together. By the end of this whole conversation, I'll get very articulate and it'll be time to stop recording. The other thing was the sort of legal or governmental side, where I believe that from reading news and stuff like that, I'm not going to have to cite sources, but people, I believe that there were lawmakers that were in favor of people coming in and stopping the certification process. And that there were lawmakers that were objecting to it and hoping possibly to stop it in that certification situation that they were there to do. But that there's this ongoing thing happening where electors are being put in place and governors are trying to people are trying to put governors into place to override whatever the votes of their states are and just basically choose the president. Of course, I'm pretty liberal, so it probably bothers me a little more on an emotional level because it was the people on the other side, so to speak. But in general, I want votes to count. I'm much in favor of broadening voting rights, making it easier and easier for every person to vote. And the idea, I guess, that I'm proposing is that the result could be, if these efforts that I believe are ongoing succeed, that the people in power will just continue to pick the president regardless of whether people vote or not. So it'll be kind of pointless to vote. Okay, so that was it for me. The less clear-minded I am, the longer I go on. Okay, so, and you mentioned the gun control thing, which again is you didn't mention gun control, you mentioned specifics, and you mentioned firearms a few times when you've talked with people. And so that's a real important issue, but where do you want to start in terms of my position doesn't really hold water?
Well, I'm not trying to change anyone's mind, but when I hear the word January 6th and insurrection, 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 insurrection constantly on the news, I do not agree that it was an insurrection. So I call it a riot.
Okay.
One of my reasons, just logically, is there were very few guns by the protesters. Certainly there were some, none were fired, that is known. And that's just a sidebar. I would have been more alarmed if 2,000 people had guns. That would be more alarming. I am a Second Amendment person, but I do believe there are too many guns in public. And I'm not sure that the Second Amendment actually means that you can have guns outside of your own home. And so that's just an aside. But when I look at the word insurrection, so the news will tell us that January 6th was an insurrection. The mostly Democratic politicians will say it was an insurrection. Yet nobody has been charged with insurrection. There is a crime called insurrection. Nobody's been charged with it. 10 people have been charged with sedition, which is not insurrection.
Seditious is something, right?
Yeah.
Remember the title? I forget.
It's sedition.
Anyway, yeah.
Then of the over 750 people who've been arrested, about 650 are misdemeanors. So if you go into the database and look at each charge, and you can actually read the complaints against each person, you will see that many of them are plea bargaining to the crime of picketing at the Capitol building, which is punishable by a 6-month jail term or a $5,000 fine. So when I hear the word insurrection, I hear it and I understand it, but I just don't see it. If there was an insurrection, then people should be charged with insurrection. In our history, even going back to the Civil War, the president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, was never charged with, well, he was charged with a crime. He was charged with treason, but he was never tried. And I don't know that any leaders were ever charged with insurrection. I don't believe so. So the idea of people pushing that it was an insurrection, just from my legal mind, my understanding of constitutional law and law, says, no, that's not what it was. It was certainly a riot, and people should be penalized if they broke the law. But I just don't see it reaching the hysterical level. And then when we talk about, are people trying to steal the election, I think both sides fear a stealing of the election, but that has not happened that we know of. Has it happened in some places? Yeah, maybe it has. I don't know. But can we find proof of a stolen election? Can we find proof of people being suppressed in their votes because of being people of color, for instance. When we look at uh, several southern states that have black senators, black governors, black politicians. So I just don't know where this suppression that people fear come from. Uh, were there people like Donald Trump trying to overthrow the government? Well, if so, then he should be charged and that should be proven. Um, I don't see that he was. I see that perhaps he was reckless, but I don't see that anyone was trying to overthrow the government. Certainly, there may have been a protest about the certification, but the certification was going to happen in my mind. I didn't see it being stopped unless you had tens of millions of people out there stopping it. So yeah, so I look at January 6th as a riot. Hopefully we won't have another one. Hopefully the government will figure out that maybe they needed National Guards troops and such, you know. Maybe when we hear about the intelligence of the FBI, how did they miss this? I can tell you how they missed it because I used to work with them. They're incompetent. That's why they missed it. They probably had people in the Proud Boys. They probably had people in that mob who were reporting to the FBI.
Meaning,
and yet,
I see. As like, yeah, as like
people.
Observers kind of thing.
Undercover people. Probably they have probably infiltrated these groups. I would have to believe they have. And in fact, I'd have to believe that they may be directing some of the things going on in these groups. And I know that because I used to do that. If I had to, I would infiltrate a crime ring and reach a level of direction. And I know the FBI does. I know they do. And so where
now,
did they?
That's really interesting because, like, of course, me always having been more than a civilian. No, I was in the Marines, but still, you know, loosey-goosey guy. So because a lot of people are going to talk about, like, well, I don't know. What goes through my head is, did you mean that they might actually try to get him to do something wrong to get some arrests? Or
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Wow, like the old-fashioned entrapment type stuff or whatever. I don't know what the name.
It's more clever than entrapment. It's taking people who have a certain bend and helping them move towards that bend. And I know that occurs. I absolutely know that occurs.
I think that's I mean, I'm not going to criticize you, but I just, that process sounds kind of sucky.
Well, in the end, the justification is the person does right or wrong on their own, even though they may have been cleverly manipulated. But in the end, they make that choice. I'm not saying they don't, but my point is that the FBI.
Yeah, that answers my question, though. You're talking about, you said manipulation. So yes, the person is going to be responsible regardless. But it's not just the FBI person speaking in neutral sentences and letting it happen.
Right. Okay. Right. And so I have to believe that on January 6th, the FBI had to have clearly known that this was going to happen. They had to have. There's no way they didn't. And if they didn't, if I'm wrong and they just didn't know, then they're totally incompetent. And something needs to be done because it should have been clear that there was going to be a problem.
Okay. And okay, what's interesting about that is I was one of those people that didn't expect anything to happen, and if it did, I didn't expect it to happen to the degree that it did happen. And even while I was working that, and even as I watched it, I actually was looking at it going, what a bunch of idiots vandalizing. It wasn't until like later that usually what happens is something happens in the news. My wife will say, "Oh my God, did you hear what happened in the news?" And I go, "There's always something happening in the news." And then 2 or 3 days later, I'll process it and go, "Oh, that was really important, and here's why I don't like it." You know. So oddly enough, even though I am very worried about this, and the position I stated at the beginning is my position. Yeah, I kind of looked at it. So like, but you were saying the FBI definitely should have known some of these things were going to happen. Like I'm saying, I kind of ignored it. And you're saying the FBI should have known ahead of time and probably did.
Well, I'll tell you something interesting that happened the day before. I was told that a friend of mine had asked their GPS how to get to Washington, D.C., and they were not given an answer by their GPS. So I tried the same thing on my own with Alexa, and Alexa would not give me the answer of how to get to Washington. That was the day before.
Yeah, yeah.
That
So
was the
that's
day before.
anecdotal, but it's telling.
It is anecdotal, but
It's telling.
I saw it happen. And
That's very, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
so someone, either maybe they didn't want people to go to the Trump rally or whatever, but for some reason there was that. It is anecdotal, but we don't know how widespread it was.
Right. Well, that's right. Yeah. Anecdotal in no way like means it didn't happen.
Right. But so, there's a lot of things we don't know, but what I do know is that of the 750 some people who have been charged, about 650 are
Right.
misdemeanors. And
So a primary thing that I'm hearing is that the legalities of it matter. The legalities of who's been charged, who hasn't, and what they've been charged with, and have they been able to cop, and have they been able to get off. Those things really matter because of due process, basically, which in a sense is a parallel response to my concern about due process and election process. So I don't know, for some reason that seems very relevant. And I think it is. I think definitions and some kind of trial in terms of some kind of formalized process like the courts do help determine how we should talk about this in terms of a historical event. And so let me ask this, riff on anything you want to, but let me ask this, what about my fears? Not just the emotional part, but my little concern, my little cognitive expectation that, oh my gosh, 5, 10 years down the line, we might as well stop going to the polls and voting because the electors are just going to pick who they want or something.
I live a life where I don't worry about things until I have to worry about them. And I don't see, do people on either side have nefarious ideas? Yeah, I believe so. I believe the Democrats do, and I believe some Republicans do. But the people, I believe, will vote, and the courts will act however they act. And I don't believe we need a federal voting rights bill that is supervised by the Attorney General. Imagine in the last administration, if you had Attorney General William Barr overseeing elections. All right. So I just don't think we need this. I don't see voter suppression. I see more people voting than ever have. And even percentage wise, even greater than, say, 120 years ago. So I think lots of people are getting out to vote. I think the right candidates are making it in where they're elected. I believe that this ratcheting up of fear by the media and by the president himself, and in fact by both presidents, where Joe Biden, I felt, alluded to the fact that if voting rights wasn't passed, that the next election would be in dispute. And so I don't think those words help. I don't think, I think we have to trust and hope. And until I see malfeasance and stolen elections, I don't see stolen elections. That's just me. That's how I live, very simply.
I'm not sure if this is an accurate summary, but it's something I kind of believe, and that is to say that the system is designed to continue to balance out these opposing things, by the framers of the Constitution, based on the idea that human nature is about looking out for one's self-interest. So they created checks and balances, and that you believe those are working and they will continue to work, even though it may seem scary sometimes.
Yeah, it's like I may not agree with something. So when they voted to not do away with the filibuster, I was okay with that. But if they'd have voted to do away with the filibuster, then I'd have been okay with that too, because it's the same process. If the Democrats want to do away with the filibuster, then they need to elect more Democrats. You see,
Yeah, yeah.
and so yes, I trust that. So if the Supreme Court rules a certain way that I don't like, that's okay. That was the process. If they go with something I like, fine. That was the process. I trust that in the end there will be a balance. If the Democrats would win the Senate and be able to add uh, Puerto Rico and Washington D.C. as states, then that's the way the process went. And so then the Republicans have to do something different or better. And so even if I don't like how the process went, I trust the process.
Okay. Yeah. 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 I'm actually getting a lot more excited about hearing these people debate, even though, everybody thinks they're crooks and liars, and that may be true. Nevertheless, they have to put semi-cogent arguments together to persuade people. And I think it does force me to learn new thoughts that I haven't considered thinking before. Oh yeah, by the way, when you talk about, there was something you were saying. Well, anyway, I'll just ask it this way. I think that when it gets into questioned elections, it eventually turns out to be the courts and ultimately the Supreme Court, I guess, right, that arbitrates that, right? I mean, like with Gore and, was it Gore? Yeah, Gore and
Yeah.
Bush. Yeah. So that's because you mentioned something about it's not the place of some group, I forget, legislators or somebody to arbitrate all this stuff. And so you said the process works. And so disputations, I guess what I'm hearing is that, yeah, they can go to the Supreme Court and see what happens.
Well, the Supreme Court has to protect itself also. And if their rulings would go, let's say, totally conservative, then the Democrats would be enraged, take over the Senate, and enlarge the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So the Supreme Court has to protect itself also in their decisions, and I believe they do.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense to me, and it puts words to the fact that these people are having natural pressure to do the best jurisprudence that they can, even though they're just like the rest of us, biased as hell.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I just try to trust that there's all kinds of reasons why people will do the right thing or the better thing, maybe not even the right thing, but the better thing. And so perhaps I'm foolish for being a trusting person, but I am. Like I said, I don't want the Attorney General deciding our elections. I just don't.
Right. Okay. That might have been where you said that's not where that needs to go. It kind of reminds me of social pressure. For example, I think most of my time, my life, I was looking for a career that would give me the social pressures to be the kind of person I want to be. Mental health counseling seems to be a little bit of that for me. And being in the psychological profession, it does seem we are very, 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 very subject to social pressure. We really are, in my opinion. And so, and it does seem like the tripartite government that we have, and probably the parliamentary and processes other people have, do have that sort of social pressure. I imagine for some Supreme Court justices, it must be fun because they're pressured to be law geeks. And
Right.
they probably want to be that, So,
for me, I wish people would quit listening to so much of the news media. I listen to NPR. I don't like NPR, but I listen to NPR for the very reason that I don't like them. I want to hear what they have to say.
Yeah.
So when I watch the news, if there's a breaking news story, I can watch any channel. because it's breaking news. Once they start telling me what I'm seeing, I don't need to listen anymore.
Yeah,
I saw what I saw.
yeah,
And so I don't need their analysis, because often, if people would think about how often the analysis is wrong by the news, it's a wonder they even listen to the news. That's my opinion. Uh, but I take in news from lots of different sources. I read an immense amount of information. I listen and remember almost everything I see, read, or hear, and I really don't get emotional about it. Maybe a little bit, but in life, I don't get that emotional about things.
yeah. I think I get pretty emotional, but I definitely know that I'm in a different state of listening and thinking when my emotions subside and all that stuff.
Right. But like I say, I'm not trying to change anyone's mind. I speak my
No,
mind.
no. Yeah, yeah,
you know.
right, exactly. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do on this channel. I'm actually hoping to eventually get somebody that's a strong QAnon believer to come on, and I'll state a position and let them tell me why
I
they're.
don't understand. Yeah, I don't understand that position. I have one friend I know of, maybe two, who believe that, um, but they don't spread it. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of wackiness out there that I just don't understand. But I think if people could just be kind to one another, and and just try to um, feel the other person,
Yeah,
see the situation of other people. And I don't do it. I don't do it all that well, but I try to do it. I try to be helpful to people. Um, I couldn't tell you what political affiliation my neighbors have. I don't know. They're neighbors. And my community, certainly it's mostly Republican, but there are Democrats. I don't know who they are.
yeah.
Um, so, I think living in a rural area like we do is a different dynamic. That's all.
Mhm. Yeah, in fact, I live in a semi-rural area, and it's the development's coming toward us. I don't know about every state, but in Florida, you can tell the most recent registration, if it's updated, of all your neighbors, the party registration.
Yeah, yeah.
I recently registered as a Democrat after being a no party voter for years, for all my life. And now I'm thinking of, just because I wanted to get in the primaries. Now I'm thinking of registering as a Republican and voting for Ron DeSantis in the primary. Um, but anyway, there was something else that was relevant to everything we've been talking about. And shoot, I forgot what it was. Um, but mainly, well, partly you were talking about disagreeing. And yeah, do you ever, so I don't know how much you're on the internet, but so you listen to different news sources. Do you ever listen to like ones that you think are way out there on the left or way out there on the right? Nearly to, I don't really like saying it, but I'll just say to kooky, you know?
Only if I run across them.
Okay.
I don't search them out. It's sort of like I study history, and I'm right in the middle with history. Certainly, there are there are fringes at each end of history. I try to avoid those because they don't make much sense to me. So I try to stay within the body, the middle body of history.
Let me see, something that could, oh, I could tell you about elections. I was one of the people who just decided that George W. Bush stole the election from Al Gore. Even though, if anything, Al Gore just gave it away if there was,
Right.
if there was anything to win back. So yeah, I think I've been in so-called Kooksville several times in my life. And it doesn't seem like if somebody straight out contradicts me, that's my motivation to change my mind. Usually my motivation is time enough,
Right.
years and years of rethinking it, or weeks and weeks of rethinking it.
Yeah, I respect where people are at. I don't blast people who answer me. I try to stay polite. Even if they say something that's not polite, I'll leave it up, unless it's really, really rude. So I think in discourse we have to hear each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely, it's even functionally better. I think I'm more likely to change my mind if I think somebody listened to me.
Sure.
And so, yeah, that's kind of the quest here. Hey, like we're actually doing pretty good. It's 1 minute and 23 seconds before I stop recording.
Well, I've enjoyed the time with you. I enjoy reading your posts and your
Yeah, I
answers to
really
my stuff.
appreciate it. I really appreciate, yeah, you've been very kind to me when I've admitted that I sometimes go straight for, like hard language. But if you can find anybody that's more likely to disagree with me, tell me about them and I'll try to recruit them for my future episodes.
All right.
All right, well, take very good care of yourself. Actually, I'm going to stop recording and then I was going to ask you a real quick question about life in general.
Sure. Yeah.
But anyway, thank you. This has been John Pratt. I don't really know if it's going to look like I'm pointing to you in the recording because it never looks the same.
Right.
But anyway, thank you very much.
Yep. You're welcome.